Welcome everyone to Journeys Through the Books of the Prophets. We are on Shmuel Bet, the 15th chapter. We missed last week because of Tisha B'Av, so a very quick review is that in the last class we dealt with the terrible rape of Amnon, who raped his sister Tamar. And Tamar was the sister of Avshalom, one of King David's sons. So as Amnon was the firstborn. Anyways, David HaMelech didn't really deal with it. And Avshalom ended up 2 years later killing Amnon. And then he goes into exile for 3 years until David more or less forgives him and brings him back to Yerushalayim. And the 14th chapter ended, this is where we ended, is that Yoav orchestrated their getting back together. And after 3 years, Avshalom and David get together. And the 14th chapter ends that David HaMelech kissed Avshalom. So we would think that, okay, everything is fine. The story is going to end very nicely, but that's not what happens. And that's where we pick up in chapter 15. So what happened was Avshalom obviously had been preparing this for quite a while in his mind, but he begins a rebellion against his father. And he does so by, at first, he prepared chariots and horses and people who would run before him. Remember, he's a prince. He is an important person in the king's household. And he has, public access. And so here he begins to kind of show his power. And then what it says, very interestingly, is that he would hang around the palace and people would come because of all kinds of complaints and questions and wanted the king's ear. And Avshalom would stand outside and kind of befriend people and made them think that David was not available for them. And he said, would it be that I was the judge of Israel? I would take care of everyone's needs. And then he would, people, again, he's the prince, so people would bow down to him, but he would take them and he would hug them and give them a kiss. And so it says that thus Avshalom stole the hearts of Israel. It was like a whole play. He had a whole political agenda here. And he knew that he had to curry favor with the people. He had not openly rebelled at this point, but here it says that he stole the hearts of Israel, meaning that he became very popular. And then it says after 40 years that Avshalom says to David HaMelech, says, allow me to go to Hebron. I've made a vow, and I need to go to Hebron to fulfill my vow. And King David gave him permission. And so he goes to Hebron. And while he's doing that, he sent his people who are in on this plan. And he sent to all the different tribes that when you hear the sound of the shofar, then everyone should say, he planted people all over Israel, and they were to blow the shofar at the same time. Avshalom is now in Hebron. Now we'll remember that is where David began to rule, because David is from the tribe of Yehuda. In a certain way, it was among the most important tribes, if not the most important tribe. And so here Avshalom is now going to kind of set up a secondary kingship in Hebron. And so that's what happened. They blew the shofars and declared Avshalom is now ruling. The question is, what does it mean in the text when it says, and it came to pass after 40 years? So there are different opinions what this means. Some say it means that Avshalom was 40 years old at this point. Others say that this is towards the very end of David's life, which doesn't seem to fit in with the rest of the text. We're only halfway through the book of Shmuel Bet. Doesn't seem that David has already ruled for 40 years. And one explanation is it's 40 years since the people first came to Shmuel and asked for a king. And that could work out with what it means here. So now Avshalom has declared himself king. And word gets back to David that Avshalom is in the process of rebelling against you. David was completely taken by surprise. As we said, the end of chapter 14, they get back together after a number of years, and we would have thought that everything was solved. But Avshalom, from the time that Amnon raped his sister, and David was outraged, but he didn't do anything to punish Amnon. And from that point, Avshalom, the seed of resentment and rebellion, was planted within Avshalom. And we remember that after the whole incident with Bathsheba, the prophet comes in God's name and tells him that the sword will come against you from your own house. And this is what is playing itself out. And of course, David remembers what this is, the consequence or the punishment, however we want to put it, for the whole incident with Bathsheba. And so David now doesn't know what Avshalom's intentions are, but he's very cautious, and he feels that Avshalom is going to come after him. So before we discuss what's going to happen next, there's a very interesting thing here, that when Avshalom asks for permission to go to Hebron, so David says, Lech b'shalom, go with peace. We have a similar case when Moshe comes to Yitro and tells him, God has appeared to me at the burning bush, has appointed me to be the leader of Israel, and I need to go back to Egypt. And he's, in a certain way, called Derech Eretz, he's asking permission. And Yitro says, Lech l'shalom. So here, David says to Avshalom, Lech b'shalom, and Yitro said, Lech l'shalom. David says, go in peace, and Yitro says, go to peace. And so there's a minhag because of this, is that when we want to give a person a blessing, we don't say what David said. We don't say Lech B'Shalom because it ended up very badly for David and for Avshalom. And one other thing before we move on, where it says that Avshalom, by befriending the people, really through speech, he was very, very convincing. He stole the hearts of Israel. So we have a similar case with Korach. In the Parsha of Korach, it begins, Vayikach Korach. And then it gives his lineage, and the verse ends. And so there's no understanding of what he took. Just Korach took. Korach, the son of, and the son of, and the son of, and the son of, took. And so the explanation is he took Israel with his words. So here it's very, very similar, that just like Avshalom stole the hearts of Israel, that's what Korach was attempting to do. So now David has to decide what to do. And then he gets word that his top advisor, Achitophel, has thrown his allegiance to Avshalom. And this was a very, very bitter blow to David, because Achitophel was his top advisor. He was considered a tremendous wise person, a Torah scholar with a high level of intuition. And David not only considered him his advisor, but it was like it was his friend. And now he's told that Achitophel has deserted him and has thrown his weight behind Avshalom. And one of the reasons is, and it's a simple reason, is Bathsheba is the granddaughter of Achitophel, and he nursed a resentment about David from the time of the whole incident with Bathsheba, which is only a few years before. So here it finally comes out that Achitophel has a reason, has a way to express his displeasure with David, and he switches sides and he throws his weight behind Avshalom. So David is getting it from every direction now. So what happens now is David, he gathers his loyal people and he has to leave Jerusalem, because even though he doesn't know what Avshalom will actually do, for all he knows, Avshalom will just stay in Hebron and try to rule from there. But obviously David has Ruach HaKodesh. He understands that if he stays in Yerushalayim, it's going to mean the end of his probably his life and his kingship. So he's preparing now. He has to flee from Jerusalem. And so the next amount of text deals with his whole leaving Jerusalem and various people who come and want to go with him and show their loyalty. Some of them he turns away because he doesn't feel that they should put themselves in danger. And one of them was Ittai the Gittite. He wasn't Jewish, but he had befriended David and he had moved to Jerusalem, and he was a big supporter of King David. And he wants to now join David as they flee the city. And no one knew what would happen. It doesn't look good for David HaMelech right now. And yet, he is willing to go. And David says, no, you're not even Jewish. Why should you put yourself in danger? I appreciate your friendship, but I don't feel right. And Ittai responds more. It's very interesting, but it's almost like Ruth, who is David's great grandmother, when she says to Naomi, "Where you go, I will go. Where you die, I will die." And Ittai more or less says the same thing. And so David allows him to come. If you remember, when David was first fleeing from Shaul, he assembled 400 men around him. It's more like they became attached to David. They were attracted to David. And first there were 400, and then the text talks about 600. So these 600 now join David. And then the priest, Sadok, and his sons also want to come, and they want to bring the Holy Ark. If you remember, a few weeks ago, we discussed the whole story of David HaMelech in a joyous procession dances the Ark up to Jerusalem, and that is where its home is now. There's no temple yet. David has already expressed that he wants to build a temple. And God says, you won't build a temple, but your son will. But the ark is in Jerusalem, and now Sadok wants to bring the ark with David. And David says no. He sends the ark back to Jerusalem. We remember that one of the wars that Israel fought with the Philistines, they took the ark with them, and the Philistines captured the ark. That was a whole story that we discussed earlier in the Book of Shmuel. So David says, no, bring the ark back. I don't want to put it in danger. And he says, plus, it will be good that you're in Yerushalayim to, keep your ears open, and you'll report to me what you hear. And then, this is a very, very important part. Hushai comes. He's another loyal follower of David, very, very loyal. And he comes, and he also wants to join David. And David sends him back and says, in a certain way, you could be my spy. Avshalom will not suspect that you still are loyal to me. He won't know this, and you should tell him that you have abandoned David, and that you will be loyal to him, and you can be the spy that, along with Sadok and his sons, that you can inform me what is happening. So we have some forewarning what Avshalom is actually going to do. So Hushai does go back, and he plays a key role, as we'll see. I'm just reminding everyone, I see there's a lot of chats. For anyone who came on later, I can't promise to get to all of the chats because I have a wedding to go to tonight. And we're going to have a limited discussion group tonight. Everyone is welcome to put in the chats, and we will share them on the WhatsApp like we do every week, but I can't promise to go through all of the chats tonight. Okay, so Hushai goes back, and that's pretty much how chapter 15 ends. Then chapter 16 comes. So here, David is already fleeing the city, and Ziva comes with lots of food. Who is Ziva? Ziva is the servant of Mephibosheth. If you remember, Mephibosheth is the son of Shaul. And he's the son of Shaul. Shaul's son ruled in Israel for a number of years before David was finally accepted as the full king of Israel. Remember, he was king for 7 years in Yehuda before he came to Jerusalem. And so during those 7 years, there was actually the house of Shaul was declared themselves king. He was killed by his own servants. And now this is the son, the grandson of Shaul. And Ziva is the servant of him. And he comes with all kinds of food because David was very, very good to Mephibosheth. Even though Shaul tried to kill him and all of that, but here Ziva comes with all kinds of food and support. And he asks, well, what about Mephibosheth? And so here Ziva says, Mephibosheth sees this as an opportunity for him to declare himself king over Binyamin. Complicated situation. So David is pretty upset by this because he was very good to Mephibosheth. But now Mephibosheth sees, I have an opportunity. Maybe I can become king again. We have to understand that this is still in the age where each tribe was very, very independent. Very independent. They would get together, fight against enemies, but it was like a clan, extended families. And so that's why there was a point that there was still a kingship of Shaul and David Amelech at the same time. So now Mephibosheth thinks he's going to become king again. So David is fleeing, and it's just like one person after another is abandoning him, yet he has a whole group of people who are following him into exile and perhaps death. No one knows what's going to happen here. So then in the 16th chapter, as David is fleeing, one of the family of the house of Shaul, and his name was Shimi ben Gera. So David is fleeing, and he comes and he starts throwing stones at David Amelech and cursing him out publicly in front of everyone. And saying, again, this is what I'm trying to explain, there was still tribal rivalries. If we go back to the book of Shoftim, if everyone remembers, there was a civil war in Israel. Everyone against Binyamin. And Shaul is from Binyamin. So here comes Shimi ben Gera, and he is cursing David Amelech like in a terrible way. So David Amelech's people asked the king, just please give us permission, we'll kill him on the spot. And David answers in a very deep way, because he understands in a certain way that all of this happening is part of the consequences of the whole incident with Bathsheba. He understands this. He somewhat accepts it. And that's what he expresses. He says, it's not really Shimei. If God didn't want this to happen, it wouldn't happen. And so if Shimei is cursing me, I need to take it. Now, when you read this, it reminds us a little bit of the teachings of the Baal Shem Tov. One of the teachings Many of you were part of our whole series on the teachings of the Baal Shem Tov. But one of his very important teachings was that a person never sees or hears or is in a situation that he's not supposed to learn something from it, that it's happening for a reason, even if it's very negative, and you can't even really understand, why do I have to hear this? Why do I have to see this? Why am I in this situation right now? And the Baal Shem Tov said, we might not know exactly, but we have to know that there's a reason. If we know that there's a reason, then we take the time to maybe contemplate, why do I have to see this? And so this is how David is reacting here. It could even be that the Baal Shem Tov learned what he had to learn from this incident. Okay, David is fleeing, and now Avshalom does come to Yerushalayim. Because when David fled, no one knew what Avshalom was going to do. Maybe he would stay in Hebron. But here he sees an opportunity. Obviously, he hears that David has fled. So it's like, okay, I'm gonna go to Yerushalayim, and Robert, I see this request to allow multiple presenters to share. No? Decline? Okay, got it. Okay. So Avshalom comes to Yerushalayim. And now Achitophel is his main advisor. Again, Achitophel is considered like the highest of the high. And then it says that Avshalom hears that Hushai is in town. So he wants to, like, are you still loyal to David? Like, what are you doing here? And so Hushai really convinces him that he doesn't want anything to do with David. He's throwing his weight behind Avshalom, and Avshalom accepts it. And then Avshalom has to decide what to do. He's come to Yerushalayim, but David still has a considerable amount of people with him, and he's fleeing. And Avshalom has to decide what to do. And so he asks Achitophel, what should I do now? So Achitophel says, gather 1,000 troops, 1,000 from each tribe, and go after David now. Like the iron is hot now. He's fleeing. He's not in a good situation. He's probably somewhat confused. Strike while you can. And then, for whatever reason, Avshalom makes, in a certain way, a poor judgment here. He turns to Hushai and he says, what do you think? And Hushai says, no, you shouldn't go after him right now. If you haven't heard, all of David's loyal people are with him. These are the same people who have fought with David for years, and David has defeated all of his enemies. These are not just anyone. David has his core army with him. If you go after him right now and put his back against the wall, you might be defeated. So my advice is, don't gather 12,000 people. Gather all of Israel and then go after David. And surprisingly, Avshalom takes Hushai's advice. It's not like it's wrong. It was, he had to make a decision. So he goes with Hushai's advice. And then what happens, there's something that happens before here, which is when they get to Yerushalayim. So Achitophel gives him some advice before what we were just talking about. And before I mentioned that David had many wives and many concubines. This was accepted in those days. We're not going to discuss according to modern cultural acceptance here. He had 10 concubines who were in Jerusalem. And he left them there thinking, why should they schlep with me? They're not going to be of any help. They'll be safer there. So Achitophel, you could see how twisted he is at this point. He tells Avshalom, you want to establish your kingship? You want to draw a line in the sand? You want to make a red line that you can't go back? You should go and have relations with your father's concubines and let everyone know that is your statement that I am king now. And that's what Avshalom does. So here we see already Achitophel is what kind of advice he's giving. And Avshalom does it. And it was a terrible thing. And then after that happens, and all this is happening very, very quickly, very, very quickly. And then he asks Achitophel for his advice what to do. Should he chase his father now? And he decides to go with Hushai's opinion. So now what it says, something very surprising, is that Achitophel goes home. He puts his house in order and he hangs himself. He kills himself. So there's discussion why did he do this? And so there's a number of opinions, but one is that he saw that once Avshalom did not take his advice, he saw the writing on the wall. He was a very intuitive person. That's why David depended on him for all those years. And he felt that Avshalom is going to fall because of this. David is going to come back and he is going to take revenge on me. And there'll be no way for me to talk my way out of it. And so he went home and he put his house in order and he hung himself. So now Hushai tells Sadok what is happening here, that Avshalom is going to assemble a huge army. And so David has some heads up as to what is happening. And David crosses the Jordan. Remember, he had conquered most of what we call Jordan today. He crosses the Jordan and he begins to prepare for war. So we're now in the beginning of the 18th chapter. It should go without saying that I can't go through every single detail here. So now we're at the beginning of the 18th chapter, and David is now preparing for war. He divides his troops. He is coming up with strategy, and he tells his people that, like David did in most cases, that he will lead the army. But he cautions everyone that when we confront Avshalom, no one is to kill Avshalom, no one is to hurt him. This is David's son. And despite the fact that he's rebelling against him, he feels terrible about the situation, and he doesn't want to harm his son. He feels that somehow he'll be able to reconcile with Avshalom. If he's able to be successful and to defend his kingship, he'll find a way to bring Avshalom back into the fold. So what happens here is that Avshalom comes with his whole army, and they face off, and David is able to defeat them, even though he had far less people. But these, again, the loyalists of David, these are the main people who were fighting with David for years and defeating enemy after enemy. Avshalom had really never led a battle. And so that was part of Achitophel, was he felt if you don't get him now, you're not going to be able to defeat him. So what happens is that Avshalom, and we discussed this before when it was describing that Avshalom was considered extremely handsome. And in fact, it said there was no one as handsome as him. And it was his charisma and the aura was in his hair. Apparently, his hair grew very quickly and very long. And it said that every year, at the end of the year, he would cut his hair, and it weighed this tremendous amount. And then it would grow back very quickly. Here, Avshalom's hair apparently is very long, and he is riding on his horse, and his hair gets caught up in the branches of a tree. And the horse keeps on running, and he is like literally hanging by his hair from a tree. And so Yoav is the main general of David's troops. He is right there when it's happening. But he comes a little bit later, and the men who see this, they remember that David said, don't harm him. And so Yoav comes, and he says, why didn't you kill him? This is the one who would have killed David if he could. And they said, the king said, don't touch him. We're not going to touch him. Yoav goes and kills him. And I said in the last class, I don't think we're going to get to it today because it's a little bit complicated, but because we're going to want to go back over the whole story of David and his relationship with Yoav, his general. But here we're going to suffice with Yoav kills Avshalom. And I'm going to mention here that in the Mishnah of Sota, the Sota is the suspected unfaithful wife. And she goes in the Torah, it explains a whole ritual that she goes through to see if she in fact was unfaithful and committed adultery. And in the Mishnah of Sota, it explains how each part of the ceremony or ritual was what's called a mida k'neged mida, a measure for a measure. In other words, because she acted in a certain way, that's why each part of the ceremony is what it was. So because of that, the Mishnah expands on the idea of measure for measure. For those who have come to classes over many years, this is a subject that we've raised scores of times. This idea, this dynamic called a measure for a measure. It plays itself out in everyone's life, throughout the Torah, the Tanakh. So here in the Mishnah, it says, it gives two examples of measure for measure, other than this suspected unfaithful wife. And the two examples that it brings is Avshalom and his hair. That Avshalom had tremendous pride and arrogance, really, because he was so handsome and so charismatic, and because his hair was so long and beautiful, that it, in the end, tripped him up. He got caught in the tree by his hair. And so the Mishnah says this is a case of mida k'neged mida. The other case that it brings is of Shimshon, of Samson, that it says that Samson went after his eyes when he had these different relationships with women from, of all places, Gaza. And so the Mishnah says, because he went after his eyes, in the end, his eyes were poked out of him. So these are the two examples that it brings. So I'm explaining this because of Avshalom. But I should mention that the Mishnah continues. Now remember, these are just two examples, but it's trying to show the whole concept of what mida k'neged mida is. And then the Mishnah says it's not just with bad things. Mida k'neged mida is with good things also. So what's the one example that they bring? Of Miriam. Is it says that when the family of Moshe put him in the ark and sent him on the Nile, hoping to save his life, it says that Miriam followed the ark and stood there to see what would happen. In other words, she was there to try to do what she could to protect him. And so the Mishnah says, because she waited for an hour to see what would happen with her brother Moshe, all of Israel waited 7 days when, in the book of Midbar, she was stricken with leprosy. Not literally leprosy, but that's how it's usually translated, with sara'at. And she had to leave the camp for 7 days. So the Mishnah says, because she waited for an hour, all of Israel waited 7 days for her. So I'm only bringing this up because here we see Avshalom, he dies because of his hair. The same hair that in a certain way was his signature fame was his hair. And obviously he was overly prideful in this area. And then it says that when Avshalom was still alive, he had built a pillar in the valley between which we call the Temple Mount or the Old City, and the Mount of Olives. And so it says here in the 18th chapter, it says that they took his body and they buried him. It wasn't just a pillar. It was like, I guess, a building that rose up like a pillar. And it says that it's called Avshalom's monument to this day. And it still exists in the valley between the Mount of Olives and the Temple Mount, or the Old City. There is Avshalom's pillar. And here it mentions that that's where he was buried. So what happens now is I'd like to finish, if I can. There's still quite a bit. I probably won't finish. No, I will not be able to finish. So, but I want to finish this part of the story. So word comes back to David. I think I started to say that David was going to lead the troops, but the troops said, no, don't come with us. Like, we're here to protect you, and having you in the field is just going to complicate things. And David, again, who had fought battle after battle, leading the troops, this time he accepted and he stood behind. So then word comes back. We're still in chapter 18. Word comes back that his troops have defeated the troops of Avshalom, and they're fleeing. And so David says, is Avshalom okay? Is he okay? At that point, they did not have word what happened to Avshalom. So David is in the camp waiting. And finally, again, I can't go over every detail, but finally, word comes back, and from the war, someone who was there, and he keeps on asking, is Avshalom okay? Is Avshalom okay? Here you see how deeply David wanted to reconcile with Avshalom. And so finally, they have to tell him, no, Avshalom was killed. And one second. And word comes back to, and David begins to mourn for Avshalom. And Yoav becomes very upset. Again, we're going to have to save this. Actually, we'll get to it next week. If people have been following the story, Yoav is a key figure from the time that David becomes king, even before when David is fleeing from Shaul. Yoav was always there for David. And yet, Yoav, this will be the second time. There's one more time that we'll only get to next week. 3 different times, Yoav kills people against David's orders. So it's very complicated, their relationship. Anyways, Yoav hears that instead of celebrating that David, not only David's life was spared, but his kingship was spared. And now David is mourning because the very person who would have killed him if he had a chance, he is now mourning for him. Yoav was very upset by this. And he goes and he gives Musar to David. He says, you're turning a day of celebration for the people. You might be mourning your son, but in a certain way, he's almost hinting, you got yourself into this. No one else got you into this. And remember, it comes from the incident with Bathsheba. And then it came because David did not do anything when Amnon raped Avshalom's sister. And so Yoav, in a certain way, he doesn't come out and say those things explicitly, but he says, we all just put our lives on our line for you. This is not proper for you to turn what should be reason for celebration. Now, he doesn't expect David to be celebrating, but what about all the other people? And so, interestingly enough, David, in a certain way, changes his tone, and he limits his mourning so as not to, and he doesn't punish Yoav. Yoav just killed his son. Nonetheless, we see that's a very complicated relationship, and that we'll get to next week. And so that way, this will be a good place to interrupt the rest of the story, because now David is, in a certain way, is king again, but he has to rebuild the people's confidence in him. And that's where we'll continue next week. We're still in the 19th chapter. Now we're going to hear how David comes back to Jerusalem, and then there's another challenge to his kingship that he has to deal with. And again, it's Yoav who is the one defending David. And it will be Yoav who will go out and defeat the next challenge to David. After that, then we will bring this whole incident to an end. And there we will discuss this complicated relationship between David and Yoav.